We're now going to have a look at a case study of the Svalbard Islands to illustrate the development opportunities and challenges of cold environments. I'd encourage you to have a look at a couple of YouTube videos as well. The links are in your workbook. The Svalbard are a group of 5 Arctic islands in the Barents Sea part of the Arctic Ocean, and they're administered by Norway. The largest island is this one, Spitsbergen, and the capital is Longyearbyen here. Most of the islands have a polar biome. 60% is covered with glaciers, but some areas are a lot milder. So this is the capital, Longyearbyen. You can see it's more tundra biome with some grass growing. No trees, of course, far too cold for that, and no crops grow. What opportunities are there for development in the Svalbard? Originally, people settled here for whaling in the 17th century. There's no more whaling, but the area around the islands in the Barents Sea is one of the richest fishing grounds for cod, herring, haddock, crabs, and both Russia and Norway fish here, and the two countries work together to make sure that the fish stocks are maintained and that the fishing is sustainable. About 100 years ago, coal mines were opened up by Norway and Russia on the islands, and many people moved here to work. But as coal prices dropped, coal mining became too expensive to mine, and one by one the mines have closed. By 2016, which is when the textbook was written, 300 people of the 2,700 people who live on the islands were employed in mining, so it was a significant employer. However, since then, the last large mines were closed, including the Svalbard mine, which was in the textbook, and many jobs have been lost. Only 2 small mines remain open, employing about 45 people, and these supply the islands with energy. So the old sites have been cleaned up and the buildings have been repurposed for growth industries in tourism and science research. At present, the island's energy needs are met from the small coal-fired power station outside Longyearbyen. It's actually Norway's only coal-fired power station. Not only is this bad for the environment as it releases greenhouse gases, but the coal's going to run out by 2025, so Svalbard is looking for alternative sources of energy. There are plans to build a hydrogen power plant, and this would use wind energy to react hydrogen and oxygen gas to produce electricity. There's also the potential in summer to generate energy through solar panels because there are 24 hours of sunlight for a few months. And the islands are near the mid-Atlantic ridge where the plates are moving apart, meaning the magma is very close to the surface. So there's potential to tap into this heat to create geothermal energy. Along with scientific research, tourism is a boom industry in Svalbard and is a major employer. People visit the Svalbard because of its natural beauty and to come to see the wonderful wildlife, and in the winter to come and see the northern lights. Adventure tourism is growing. People like to hike, kayaks, ride snowmobiles, go on sledges. A lot of people come on cruise ships. Of the 70,000 tourists who visited in 2011, just under half came on the cruise ships, and the harbour has been enlarged to accommodate these ships. As the sea ice no longer freezes around Svalbard in the winter, ships can now come in the winter as well, which has extended the tourist season. Now let's have a look at some of the challenges to the development of the Svalbard. What challenges do you think they are? How might they be overcome, and are they greater than the opportunities? Pause this video and just think about those questions. One of the major challenges is the extreme temperature. It can get down to -30 or below, which makes it really dangerous and difficult to work outside. You have to dress up in multiple layers, and between the end of October and the beginning of March, it's complete darkness outside. This makes it very difficult to work. The construction of buildings, of homes, ports, roads, can only happen in the short summer months. The houses are built above ground level so that they don't melt the permafrost underneath it, which would make the foundations unstable. Similarly, the roads are built on gravel beds, and this reduces heat transfer, which could also melt the permafrost and cause the roads to buckle. There's the challenge of providing service pipes to homes without the water and the sewage freezing. So these pipes are heated, insulated, so they don't freeze, and then they're raised above the ground so they don't thaw the permafrost. The Svalbard is pretty inaccessible. You can get there by boat. It takes a couple of days from the mainland, or you can fly in from Norway and Russia into the capital, Longyearbyen. But once you're on the island, it's even more difficult to get around. There are some roads, about 50 kilometres of roads, but often they're covered in snow and they're focused on the capital. Once you're out of the main town, it's much harder to get around. Most people use snowmobiles. There are one or two small landing strips on the further islands. Now have a go at answering this question. There are more opportunities than challenges for development in Svalbard. To what extent do you agree with this statement? There is huge pressure to develop cold environments for their resources. The question is, should they be developed or conserved? Have a look at this map. This map shows the last wilderness areas in the world. Wilderness areas are intact, undisturbed natural environments, and many of them are in cold areas, for example in Alaska, Greenland, Siberia, Antarctica, where they haven't been developed because they're so cold and so remote. Some people say they should be kept as wilderness, others say they should be developed for their resources. So why should we protect wilderness areas? Tundra and polar areas are very fragile. The plants are very easily damaged, and because there's such low biodiversity, if plants are destroyed, animals have few alternative plants to eat. In the bottom right-hand photograph, you can see the tracks made on the waterlogged tundra, and these were made by oil tanks in Siberia. Every time they drove across this bit of tundra, they had to make new tracks because it was so boggy. And this scarred a large area of land, and it's going to take many years for this land to recover. So if areas are developed, say, for mining, it's not just the mining site that is going to scar the landscape, it's the buildings that are being built to house the workers, it's the roads that are being built to get to the mines. Many unique species live in polar and tundra areas, like polar bears, penguins. If these are disturbed, we can lose these species. We must also remember that there are a lot of indigenous people who live in these wilderness areas, and they rely on the natural environment to maintain their way of life. In the top middle picture, you can see the Nenets people of northern Siberia in Russia, and they rely on reindeer herding and fishing for their way of life. And they fear that oil development will, first of all, ruin the pasture of the reindeer by driving across the tundra, and will also restrict their migration routes that they need to take. And they fear that the oil will spill into the rivers and kill the fish. Finally, a lot of these wilderness areas are great places to do scientific research. You can see there a scientist from Antarctica taking out an ice core, an important way to look at climate change. And these areas are some of the best places to do this because they are so unspoilt. So how can we balance the need to develop cold environments for their resources with the need to protect those environments? Well, some would say that we can use technology to help us do this. Now, if you look at this photograph, it's of the Trans-Alaskan pipeline, and it goes from Prudhoe Bay in the north of Alaska where the oil fields are, and it takes oil right down to Valdez Port in the south. Now you'll see it's high on stilts and it's been well insulated, so it's not going to thaw the permafrost underneath. It's high so that the caribou can still migrate in their usual patterns underneath this pipeline. Governments can also act to protect areas and control development. So in Alaska, again, you've got two areas that have been set up by the government to protect the animals and birds that live there and keep oil drilling away from those sensitive areas. So in the west, you've got the Western Arctic Reserve, and in the east, you've got the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Now in the seas, you have these ships that belong to the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, a US department called NOAA, and they patrol the seas and they monitor the wildlife in the seas to make sure it's not being damaged. Some places are not just governed by one country, and so we need international agreements to decide how to develop and protect areas. We've already mentioned how Russia and Norway work together in the Svalbard to protect fish stocks. The most famous international agreement, though, is the Antarctic Treaty. It's been signed by 48 countries that have agreed not to lay claim to Antarctica, but instead to keep it as a natural reserve devoted to peace and science. So any scientific research that happens there is shared between countries. There is no military use allowed, neither nuclear waste is allowed to be dumped there. Mining is not allowed, even though there are minerals there, and any tourism is tightly controlled. Finally, conservation groups such as the World Wildlife Fund or Greenpeace monitor cold environments, and they work with the governments, local people and businesses to raise awareness of the issues affecting the plants and animals who live there, and persuading people to look after these areas. So, for example, Greenpeace is currently calling for an Arctic sanctuary to be created in the Arctic Ocean to protect the animals from oil rigs and from overfishing. So, what do you reckon? Should cold environments be protected or not? Can we use cold environments without damaging them, or are they just too fragile? To finish, have a go at answering this question. Cold environments shouldn't be protected. Do you agree or do you disagree?